This month, school boards across the province are mailing out suspension notices for students who have failed to provide updated immunization records. This comes as Vancouver deals with the fallout of a measles outbreak and Ontario confirms a case in the Niagara region. Despite all the science supporting them, it seems some people are still hesitant about vaccines. Why? And what can be done about it? With us to weigh in on that, in Edmonton, Alberta, Timothy Caulfield, author of The Vaccination Picture. He's also Canada Research Chair in Health Law and Policy at the University of Alberta. And here in our studio, Dr. Natasha Crowcroft, Chief of Applied Immunization Research and Evaluation at Public Health Ontario. She's also a professor in the Dalla Lana School of Public Health at the University of Toronto. And Dr. Dan Flanders is here. He's a pediatrician and founder of KinderCare Pediatrics, and we are delighted to welcome you two here in our studio. Timothy Caulfield, great to have you on the program again, and I want to start with you, Tim, if I can. I want to start with measles. Measles are making a comeback. How come?
Oh, it's incredibly frustrating. And I think it is largely due to the spread of misinformation about vaccines. Look, measles, a very contagious disease, and the measles vaccine, a very powerful and effective vaccine. So I think there is no doubt, and if you look at the World Health Organization statements on this, that it can be directly attributed to people not getting vaccinated, and a lot of that has to do unfortunately, with the spread of misinformation and myths and, outright lies about vaccination.
We will touch on more of that as we continue our conversation. How dangerous are measles if you're a kid?
So if you're a kid, as an illustration, last year in the European region, 72 children died from measles. Now, 72 children that didn't need to die in one of the richest parts of the world. There were thousands and thousands of cases of measles. So from one perspective, if you get measles, you're likely to be fine. But from another perspective, there's a real risk of dying right now. I don't want to make it too complicated, but if you hear people talking about, I had measles when I was a child and I was fine, that's true. Most people are absolutely fine. And we don't know who or why some people are not fine and why some kids and some adults will die from measles. In some cases, it's because they have immune problems. But in most cases, they're completely healthy people who die. And right now, if your child is one of those unlucky people that gets really sick with measles, there's nothing we can do about it.
What do you die of if you get measles and you're one of those 72? What do you die of?
So one of the commonest complications of measles is pneumonia. So you can die from complications of pneumonia. One of the nastiest ways of dying is with something called encephalitis, where your brain gets infected. Yeah. And that's what killed one of Roald Dahl's children, a little girl who died at the age of, I think she was 6. And then you see your child's personality disintegrate in front of you, and then you die quickly. Another way that I think is even, in some ways, more tragic is that children recover from the measles if they get it when they're very young, and then several years later they get another kind of encephalitis we call subacute sclerosing panencephalitis, a very long name.
I won't ask you to spell that.
And that causes a progressive neurological degeneration where a child will lose their faculties and then eventually die as well. So there are several really horrible ways to die from measles, but the bottom line is most kids won't die. Most people will get measles without a vaccination program. So another way of thinking about it from a sort of natural perspective is that if measles were so dangerous as to kill people in the way that Ebola would kill people, the human race probably wouldn't be here. So we have evolved to deal with it to an extent, but then it's certainly more dangerous than many other things we take precautions against.
Let me find out from Dan, how contagious are measles today?
So some people describe it as the most contagious infectious disease that we know. It's airborne, and if somebody who has the measles is in a room and sneezes, measles particles actually float in the air for, some people say, up to an hour, so that if another person walks into that room 30, 40 minutes later, they could catch it. It's exquisitely contagious, which makes these outbreaks particularly difficult to get a handle on, because one person with measles sneezing in the airport potentially exposes thousands and thousands of people.
Do you see much of it in your practice?
I think I've seen 2 cases in my career.
In your whole career?
Which is a reflection of the success of the vaccine. On the other hand, I'm a little bit fearful that that's going to change over the next 10 years and it's going to become more common unless we can get our acts together and really make a change in the public health sphere.
Natasha, we talked in the intro about a case in British Columbia, a case in Ontario. Where else are we seeing measles outbreak right now?
Well, there are big outbreaks in Europe. I'm also working with the Pan American Health Organization to try and get on top of measles in Brazil, in Colombia, in Costa Rica, in Venezuela, where the problems really started. There are outbreaks all around the world right now. And one of the issues is vaccine hesitancy, which as Dan was saying, and Tim was saying, is a huge issue facing immunization programs, and the WHO has flagged this as one of the major challenges facing public health in 2019. So it's definitely an issue. But we can't take away from the fact that measles is one of the hardest diseases to control as well. And you need a nearly perfect immunization program to keep it under control. And the great thing about having a nearly perfect immunization program is all the other vaccinations that are in there as well will also, all the other diseases get prevented as well.
Well, we've got some numbers here on why this may be recurring these days. And this is from Angus Reid. We'll put the numbers up on the screen here, and I'll read them out for those listening on podcast. Survey of Angus Reid examining the views of Canadians on vaccines. This is a month old, this information, and or not even. 83% of those surveyed say they would vaccinate their children. 83%. However, how about this? 29%, almost 1 in 3, say the science on vaccines isn't quite clear. Timothy, let me get you to react to that first. 29%. Are they right? Is the science on vaccination still not quite clear?
Yeah, I find that survey fascinating because it really illustrates the polarization of the discourse, right? Look, I think that 29% really reflects what is often called the vaccination hesitant. Now, these are not hardcore anti-vaxxers. These are people that are believe that the science is uncertain. And look, the science around these kinds of things, like if you're talking about the routine vaccines, is pretty darn settled, right? I mean, we have a vast body of evidence about both safety and efficacy. So the science around that kind of stuff is pretty settled, or at least as settled as science gets. Science is always evolving. So that number is, for me, really frustrating, but also, I think, really is important information about what's going on right now. It really isn't necessarily the hardcore anti-vaxxers. It's this cohort that is often called the vaccination hesitant, which is for sure being influenced by the rhetoric flowing from the hardcore anti-vaxxers.
Well, pick up on that if you would, Timothy, because, obviously you've been on this program numerous times. Natasha, you've been on this program before. There are people all over the place, smart, educated, professional people who are making the good case for vaccines, and yet here we are again, 3 in 10 people say the science isn't quite settled or isn't quite clear. Where does the distrust come from?
Well, I think it's also really important before we dig into that is to, and as Natasha and Dan can speak to, people don't get vaccinated for a whole bunch of reasons. Sometimes it's just convenience. Sometimes it has to do with who their healthcare provider is. And also people have different kinds of concerns. So I think we at first have to listen. But the broader issue, if you believe the emerging research, definitely has to do with the breakdown in trust, a growth in suspicion. You look at in the Philippines where there is a big outbreak right now, and they did a survey recently that found trust in vaccines deteriorated, I think it was 93% just 5 years ago to below 40% now. I mean, that is an incredible illustration of a breakdown in trust. And a lot of that breakdown is the result of the spread of this misinformation. There's really interesting research that shows just being exposed to this nonsense can create a degree of hesitancy.
Dan, I wonder if in your professional experience, I'd like to know the kinds of excuses you hear from parents or from their children about why they're not getting vaccinated.
Yeah, I mean, most of them are rooted, I think, in fear, and I think
Fear of what?
Fear of the nonsense that the anti-vaccine folks are peddling. Their message is scary, and fear is very potent. And it's a heck of a lot easier to scare somebody than it is to unscare them and turn them back the other way. And there's just something very, I very impactful that happens when exposure to this misinformation sort of makes its way into the mindset of parents, and they come in afraid. And I think it's a small percentage of parents who have a completely different worldview, who walk in without a reasonable trust for the healthcare system, and so that's a very small slice of it. Most of these parents are just afraid that the vaccine is going to cause autism, the vaccine is going to cause neurodegenerative disorders in their kids, that the vaccine is going to take the beautiful glistening out of their eyes.
For the record, is any of that true?
I've never seen it. I mean, the amazing thing is you hear all these outrageous, unbelievably distressing stories about what happens to people. And we give tens of thousands of vaccines, and we just don't see it. We just don't see it.
Do you ever get a situation where kid comes in afraid of needles, and the parents say, do they really have to get it? Does that happen?
So the fear of needles is an amazing conversation, and there's a whole literature on the impact of needle phobia on subsequent engagement with the healthcare system down the road, and that's fascinating, and that's not something to trivialize. So that is an issue. That's not misinformation, though. So I would put that in a completely different category, where needle phobia is a real thing. There's real consequences. It's rigorously studied, and it's an interesting conversation. On the other hand, getting autism from vaccines is just
ridiculous.
It's fake news.
Fake news. Yeah.
It's nonsense.
We know a little something about that.
Yeah.
Timothy, please come on in, Tim.
I think it's, Dan makes a really good point. And I think we cannot underplay this autism fear. And first of all, let's start with saying this is a complete myth. Study after study after study has shown, independent study has shown that there is no connection between vaccines and autism. In fact, another recent study came out just weeks ago, again confirming no connection. But if you believe a study done by Josh Greenberg at Carleton, about 28% of Canadian parents have some degree of hesitation as a result of the autism myth, right? So that one myth has been incredibly powerful, and it has endured despite what the actual science says. And I think Dan makes another really important point. Part of that is the power of the story, of the narrative, right? You hear Jenny McCarthy talking about her kid getting autism from a vaccine, and that is a powerful story if you're a parent, right, versus the data, right? And there's really interesting research that shows that a powerful narrative, a powerful story can overwhelm a mountain of data. And unfortunately, that's happening all too often in this situation.
Well, I wonder, Natasha, if we have to sort of separate people into two different categories here. There are the anti-vaxxers who are in one kettle of fish, if you like, and there are some people who are just sort of nervous or hesitant or afraid of needles, and maybe they're in a second camp. Mm-hmm. The anti-vaxxers are okay, let's leave them over here for a second. To your knowledge, is the number of people who are, quote unquote, vaccine hesitant, is that number growing?
I think it has grown. Everything we've heard and everything that Tim has said has shown a growth in that. I don't like the idea of putting the anti-vaxxers over there, though. And I think one thing we should be very clear about, and as a professional, and and Dan as a clinician, we're talking about people who are genuinely probably want the best for children. And so while we think about the vaccine hesitant parents who are just worrying because they're the group, probably the biggest group and the people we really want to reach, I really don't feel comfortable just sort of putting people who are anti-vaccine sort of in a corner.
I put them in a corner because I just assume they're beyond persuasion, whereas the others are not.
They may be, but I also think there's ways in which we've been just talking about narrative, where we can think a bit more about the narrative we're using. And one of the things that if you look at some of the anti-vaccine material or the websites, they're absolutely beautiful often. They're very well crafted and they use narrative really well. And we don't do that in public health as well. Mm-hmm. I think one of the most powerful things we have is really people like Dan, because the individual relationship between someone like yourself and your patients, that is something that generally works. You know, of all the solutions we have, the relationship with your own provider, if you ask parents, who do you trust? They trust their own doctor. So you're the solution to the problem, Dan, not to put any pressure on you.
No pressure.
It's all on your shoulders.
Right, thank you.
People like myself who work in public health, we can spend a lot of time talking about how the science for vaccines is very clear. I'd actually like to move beyond talking about science, because I think science is a bit worrying to people. And when you talk about science and vaccines, some people think, well, does that mean that there are questions still? And actually, the vaccines we use every day, they're what you get when the science is over. When we've done the science, when we've found out this is the right thing to do, then we start vaccinating. So that idea that the science isn't clear, well, science is never clear. Like, that's true about science. The science is never clear.
Always evolving.
It's always evolving. So I actually agree with parents. Of course, the science is never clear. Is the science about vaccines clear? Well, actually, it's so clear that we don't have to do it anymore. When we say vaccines are safe, it's not because we're researching vaccines. It's because we're observing them. We're looking to see. We're seeing what's in front of us.
The proof of the pudding is in the eating.
Yeah, we don't need science to tell us that measles has gone away.
Well, let's try this. Robin Urbex, a really good writer with the CBC website, and here's what she's had to say about all this. Sheldon, bring the graphic up if you would. In talking about winning the hearts and minds, she says, show them what a child hospitalized with measles-induced encephalitis looks like. Tell stories like that of Jamie Shanbaum, whose legs and fingers were amputated after she contracted meningitis as a Texas University student. Let them see what it's like for a baby with whooping cough to try to struggle to breathe. Anti-vaxxers know how to turn suffering into propaganda, to use anecdote to stoke fear. Fighting fear with information doesn't work as well, unfortunately, as fighting fear with fear. Okay, Timothy, I know you don't like to dabble in fear because you're a guy of science, not a guy of science fiction, but what about it?
Yeah, I mean, it is, I do hesitate, if I could use that term, to use fear, because you don't want to fight anecdote with anecdote. You want to fight fear with fear, because then it feels like you're just becoming part of the problem. But I think we can do that in this case, because we just have to talk about the truth. Think about how Natasha started this segment, right? Describing what these deaths are like, right? That's powerful information, and that will resonate with parents. There was a really interesting study that was done in the US where they were dealing with vaccination hesitant parents, and what they did, and it was run like a clinical trial to find out what kind of intervention would work. And what they did is they provided, yes, this is a scientific consensus. I still think it's important to provide that information. But then they also provided a story, a narrative, just like Natasha suggested, from the perspective of a parent. And in addition to that, they used pictures. This is what the disease looks like. And if you bring these various tools together, you can persuade a few parents. You're not going to change everyone's minds, but you can have an impact. So I totally agree with Natasha. We've got to think of more creative communication strategies, and unfortunately that probably involves a little bit of fear.
Dan, I wanted, can we do a little play acting here?
I'll do my best.
I'm one of those, we're imagining here. My kids have all been vaccinated, so I'm going to do a little play acting here.
Sure.
I'm coming to you as my child's pediatrician, and I'm saying, Dr. Dan, I keep reading about this stuff, about how vaccines are potentially dangerous, and I don't know about whether or not my little junior here should get it. Convince me.
So any particular fears that you have, like maybe we can hone in on what specifically you're worried about.
Well, I read something on a website about some model who says her kid got autism because of having a vaccination. Anything to that I ought to be worried about?
I really don't think so. Certainly.
You don't think so, or you know so?
So the science is unbelievably clear. Study after study after study after study. Well done, well-designed studies across hundreds of thousands, millions of subjects have shown to us without any doubt that the risk of the measles vaccine is infinitesimally small, and the benefit derived from it is saving millions of lives every year.
But there is a risk, right, Dr. Dan? There is a risk.
So there is a risk to everything you've ever done in life and everything that you plan to do in life. So there's a risk that you're going to get struck by lightning twice. And that's the degree of risk we're talking about in terms of what might happen, what might happen to you that is horrible if you get if you get the MMR vaccine. So the risk is so incredibly trivial, meaning the safety profile is so incredibly reassuring that I certainly wouldn't hesitate for a second to give it to my children and to every one of my patients.
So you have kids, Dr. Dan?
I sure do.
And you've vaccinated your kids?
As soon as I was able to, I gave it to them.
And okay, you told me about the risk in the event of a vaccine that goes south. Compare that, if you would, to the risk if I don't get my kids vaccinated.
So if you don't get your kids vaccinated, there's a reasonable chance that nothing at all will happen and that they'll grow up to be perfectly healthy kids. And
That's hardly an incentive for me to get my kids vaccinated.
It's the truth.
Okay.
But there's a legitimate chance that your child will get one of these vaccine-preventable diseases, and that outcome would be devastating, or could be devastating.
And
why take that risk?
If you want to compare the math between not taking the risk of the vaccine or taking the risk of getting some awful disease, which risk is the better risk to take?
So it's a complete no-brainer. It's so incredibly compelling from every source of authority you can find that it's in your interest and in our community's best interest for everyone who can to get vaccinated. And that's 99.9% of our population.
Okay, Dr. Dan, you've convinced me.
I hope I convinced you.
Stick 'em. Go get 'em. Let's talk about something that actually garnered a lot of attention just a few weeks ago because there was a great deal of fuss right here in the capital city of the province of Ontario. Some anti-vaxxers took out some billboards and they drew a lot of attention. And I think actually we've got a couple of examples. There they are right there. And again, for those listening on podcast, I'll describe these a little bit. The one on the left there says, no shots, no school, not true. And it's put up, it says, educate before you vaccinate. And this group is called Vaccine Choice Canada, which sounds like, who's against choice? It's a very nice to have choices in life. And it is a picture of a kid sitting on the steps with a doll, looking not too good. And then there's another one on the right that says, how many is too many? Who decides? And it's a bunch of vials of vaccines. And again, the tagline, educate before you vaccinate, Vaccine Choice Canada. Natasha, when you saw this, what'd you think?
I was horrified, to be honest. And it goes back to, again, what I was saying about how the anti-vaccine groups do beautiful communications, and these are lovely pictures. It also really resonated with me because I was interested when I was listening to your conversation with Dan about how did you get your kids vaccinated? I mean, that's the commonest question I ever had. And I would have very long conversations with people about MMR and autism, and at the end, the only thing that really made a difference was whether or not I'd had my kids vaccinated, which of course I have.
Powerful information.
Totally. I mean, it speaks to whether I'm credible and whether I believe what I'm saying. So I totally get it. But I'm also from the very target group that is vaccine hesitant, in that I'm a white, educated, I happen to be UK born, but I could have been Canadian born, and a woman. And when you look at the pictures that Vaccine Choice included in those billboards, those are those kids as well. They're a very privileged group of society often. And I think it's a really interesting sociological aspect to this that we haven't talked about. Women have struggled to be heard often in society. And women of my generation grew up in a very male-dominated world. And when we were having kids, we were often not listened to in the healthcare sector. And so some of the narrative I heard when I was a mother of young kids from other anti-vaccine mothers, which I did, and this is in the UK, it wasn't in Canada, but I hear the same narrative here. It was about really disrespecting authority because people were reclaiming it for themselves. And there is a feminist angle to this, which we haven't gone into, but I feel like I'm part of that community, and it resonates with me at the same time as being horrified by the messages, because this isn't a game, and this is about children's lives. One of the problems which I was thinking to, I was thinking about when I was listening to Dan, is one of the biggest challenges with vaccines is they do nothing. Vaccines actually do nothing. Most of the time, nothing happens. And most of the time, your kid, you don't see anything. You don't see any benefit. And when everybody's getting vaccinated, you don't see the diseases either. So there's nothing to see to be scared of. But as soon as enough people stop vaccinating, then your kid will get measles eventually. It will track you down. So I can see why parents feel they can question and make other decisions. And I can see why Vaccine Choice Canada can come up with the narratives it has, but it's all an illusion. You know, this is not a game, and kids will get really seriously harmed as a result of this kind of communication.
I find the conclusion that you came to fascinating, because I would have thought that all of the qualifications that you put on the table would have demanded the exact opposite conclusion.
Yeah.
The fact that you're a mother, the fact that you've vaccinated your own children, the fact that you're a professional, the fact that you're educated, the fact that you've got that fantastic accent in which everything sounds so much better than the rest of us sound, those seem like 5 or 6 really great reasons to believe you. Why wouldn't they?
Well, I think what it boils down to really is relationships. And if you have, and it goes a bit back to what I was saying about Dan's, the importance of role of people like Dan, that it's that individual relationship you have. So if somebody knows me, then they may believe me, but if they don't know me, then they won't. They'll believe their friends, and they'll believe people who are like-minded, and people who are living in, you know, we talk about the echo chambers or these social silos that people are in. And so they'll believe messages from organizations like this.
Well, let me pick up on that with Timothy, because the fact is that the prime news source for so many people nowadays is Facebook. And, you know, there is a lot of trafficking and anti-vaccine talk on Facebook. Facebook has announced, Tim, that they intend to crack down on anti-vaccine content. In your view, how likely is that to have an impact?
Well, I'm really glad they're doing it, and I'm really glad they're recognizing that the role that they have in the spread of misinformation, not just in the context of vaccines, but more broadly. For sure, I mean, there's a lot of research that shows that social media, you know, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, is how, you know, it shapes people's universes. You know, this is their reality now. And so we do need to pay attention to this. And the other thing that these platforms do is they create this polarized discourse, and there's a lot of research that shows that, right? What is heard are the extreme views. What's shared are the extreme views. So it creates this impression that there is actually a debate going on among scientists, which of course isn't the case at all. But it gives life to that perception. So I think it's great that Facebook is doing this. We'll have to see how it plays out. As Dan and Tasha have noted, you know, these anti-vaxxers are nimble. They're going to figure out ways around the algorithm. They're going to figure out ways to allow these confirmation bubbles to persist. So it is, you know, it is going to be difficult. It's going to be an ongoing battle. But I'm glad at least that these platforms are recognizing their role.
Dan, how often do people come to you and say, you know, I read on Facebook, or a friend told me on Twitter, or I heard something somewhere on social media about?
Yeah, all the time.
All the time, eh?
That's their social community now, and there's you name the topic. There's a group for it, and yeah, this is where people get their information from. I was just thinking, we were talking a lot about what works and what helps, and the Facebook the Facebook issue is I think a good segue to the idea of legislation, and you know, in the trenches, in practice, like it feels wonderful when you convince a family after 2 years of discussion. It feels wonderful, but you really feel like it's a drop in the ocean. And I really wonder if ultimately the way to get these rates up is to get governments to start writing legislation that ensures that, you know, we get our rates up above 95%.
Well, let me follow up on that, because I believe it is the case in the province of Ontario that vaccines are mandatory if you want your child to attend a public school. There are, I think, a couple of exemptions. I think if you have a religious opposition to it, you can make that argument. If there are, for whatever reasons, medical explanations for why you don't want a vaccine, that's also allowed. I think California recently got rid of this religious exemption. Should we do the same thing here in the province of Ontario?
So I don't think there's a right answer that everyone is going to create consensus around. But as a general principle, I think as the crisis becomes more dire, the need to legislate more aggressively is going to rise.
Well, I wonder what that looks like. Timothy, can the Ontario legislature pass a law saying if you want your kid to go to a public school, I'm sorry, you must get them vaccinated, or else what? I mean, that would be my question. How do you intend to enforce that?
Yeah, I think that the provinces do have the jurisdiction to enact that kind of legislation, and in fact, even the school boards could take some action. And as you know, there's a sort of plurality across Canada on how people address this. But Dan's right. You know, having mandatory vaccines. You hear that a lot, right? That phrase a lot, and it's rolled out as if that's the solution. But it is more complex, right? Because if you're going to do that, you are going to polarize the discourse more, right? You know, people who are being forced to do this are going to be more angry, and it might feed into the ideological angle that Natasha touched on, right? Because it's big government, you're being forced to do these things to your kids. Having said all that, like Dan, you know, I kind of tend to favor it. You know, that's where my gut is, subject to an analysis of how this could be rolled out in a way that makes it really effective. But if you look at other jurisdictions, you look at what's happening in Australia, you look at California, the research after they've changed the rules show that there are more people who are vaccinated. So short term, for sure, it looks like there's a benefit to it. So I tend to favor a more aggressive stance when it comes to legislative and regulatory action.
Let me get Public Health Ontario's view on this. Should the Ontario legislature pass a law that simply says if you want to go to one of the 95%, if you want to be one of the 95% of the students in the province of Ontario who is educated in a publicly funded school, you must be vaccinated, period, full stop, no exemptions?
So I'll give you my personal view. I'm not speaking on behalf of the organisation, but I'm very much of the view that Tim just articulated, that we would polarise the debate. I know that from that Angus Reid survey that you mentioned, that most parents are actually in favour of mandatory legislation. In Ontario right now, we don't have mandatory immunisation, we have mandatory choice, which is something completely different. So
what's the difference?
The difference is that parents are required to have got an exemption for their child if they're not going to be vaccinated. So they have to go through a process. They have to go to the local public health unit. They have to go through an education session. And then they have to get an officially signed document to say, I'm exempting my child. So it's a bit of a process, but it's, anyone can do it. And then their child may be excluded from school if there's an outbreak, for example. So that is a way of making it clear that it's an expectation that kids will be vaccinated. We call it mandatory choice. I think the word mandatory itself is really problematic. And it triggers such a bad sense in the very people we're trying to persuade. So even if most parents think it's a good idea for immunisation to be mandatory, it doesn't mean it's the right policy tool, because it could actually cause problems for the very group we're trying to reach. And as an illustration of how much a trigger word it is, some of us wrote a paper on mandatory immunisation, which is a discussion about the issues last year. And myself and one of the other authors, two of us, for some reason, two of us were singled out from the list of authorships. We were then attacked by email in such a way that the police had to get involved and had to investigate.
You were threatened?
We were threatened. We had a stream of threatening
physical
emails.
Violence?
With what it was implied physical violence in the emails. And initially I wasn't that bothered, but it just kept coming. So I forwarded it to the right people. The police came to see me. They actually tracked down who it was, and it was somebody in the States apparently, and that person can now not come to Canada because of the message they've sent. So that's one example. It's not the only time. I mean, I often receive messages following any kind of public thing like this from people. Sometimes they're just people trying to persuade me of a different view, but they are sometimes also quite aggressive messages.
Are you on Twitter?
I am on Twitter, and
Do you
I
get a lot
haven't
of...
been trolled on Twitter, but maybe I will be now. I don't know, but I'm just saying that it's just illustrative of the feeling that people get, and it was really the word mandatory that got this person going. That word. So
Dan,
we really have to be careful.
What if we're down to our last 30 seconds here, Dan? What if the government just sort of said something like, "We'd really, really love it if you vaccinated your kids. We'll take the word mandatory out, but we'd really love it if you did it. And if you don't show up to the school with proof that you've been vaccinated, might be problematic."
So I think that position is reasonable in a community where vaccination rates are high.
But we don't have that.
Or we're heading towards not having that. Or some parts of Canada, we don't have that at all, correct? I think as you get towards communities where their vaccinations are low, I don't think that's an effective approach. I think the hammer needs to come down, and we need to be a little bit more, this is the way it's going to be, because we need to protect the vulnerable people in our community.
I have to bring the hammer down as it relates to our clock because it's run out. Timothy Caulfield, always good of you to join us on the program. Thanks so much for being there for us on the line from the University of Alberta. Dr. Natasha Crowcroft from Public Health Ontario. Dr. Dan Flanders, Executive Director of KinderCare Pediatrics. Great to have all of you on TVO tonight. Thank you so much.
Thanks so
and
much.
I hope you don't get
Thank
trolled
you.
as a result of this.
The Agenda with Steve Bacon is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario, helping businesses stay on the right side of change with strategic thinking, insightful decisions, and business leadership. Are you on the right side of change? Ask an Ontario CPA.